If you had stood atop the mountain peak of this fjord 1,000 years ago, what you would have seen was not the quietest and wealthiest land in the world as it is today. Instead, it was the roar of massive waves, the scent of smoke from burning fires, and the clashing of iron axes against wooden shields. This was a land forged from ice and blood, a realm that birthed the demons of the ocean and transformed a living hell into a kingdom the world would never forget. Look at modern Norway today, one of the happiest nations on earth, a land of immense wealth, breathtaking fjords, and a welfare system most can only dream of. Yet it stands in stark contrast to its dark and turbulent past. The word Norway, or Norðverg in Old Norse, did not mean a country. It meant the way to the north. It was a treacherous sea route, tracing jagged, desolate stone coastlines, where winds blew hard enough to tear you apart, and snow blanketed the land for half the year. The first humans to set foot here did not come to build an empire. They came because they had no other choice. And so began a saga spanning thousands of years, a story of tribes defying nature, a king who vowed never to cut his hair until he united the land, and naval battles on frozen waters that would alter the face of Europe forever. Over 10,000 years ago, the world was still held tightly in the grip of the Ice Age. Colossal ice sheets, kilometers thick, crushed and carved through the bedrock, leaving massive scars across the earth. The happiest nations on earth, a land of immense wealth, breathtaking fjords, was always bound to fracture upon the death of its king. Following Harald Fairhair's death, Norway plunged into chaos once more. Sharp, rocky coastlines emerged, accompanied by low-lying tundra vegetation and migrating herds of wild animals. The first Stone Age humans cleared dense coastal woods and established settlements along the shore. They were not conquerors, but mere hunter-gatherers struggling to survive day by day. Life in that era was a constant battle against the freezing cold, ready to claim lives the moment the fire went out. Archaeological evidence, such as the rock art in Alta in the far north, reveals that these early humans shared a profound bond with reindeer and seafaring. They carved crude boat figures into coarse granite, completely unaware that thousands of years later, their descendants' ships would become Europe's worst nightmare. As time passed, the Bronze and Iron Ages arrived. A slightly warmer climate gave rise to small farming communities scattered along the fjords. Yet Norway was naturally divided. Towering, snow-capped mountains isolated each fjord community entirely from the next. There was no Norway back then, only isolated valleys ruled by hundreds of petty chieftains. Each tribe had its own laws, its own gods, and viewed those from neighboring fjords as strangers or enemies. Pressure mounted as the population grew, while arable land along the fjords remained severely limited. The tough, rocky soil could no longer feed every mouth. Famine began to creep in during the long, unforgiving winter. Land forged from ice and blood, a realm that birthed the demons of the ocean. By the 8th century, Norse shipbuilding technology had reached its absolute pinnacle. They engineered the longship with a brilliant keel design, shallow enough to sail down narrow rivers, yet tough enough to smash through violent swells of the North Atlantic. These longships were not merely vessels, they were masterpieces of warfare and survival. Their prows were carved into dragons or sea serpents to strike terror into enemies and ward off land spirits. In June of 793 AD, lightning struck the very heart of the Western Church. Dragon-headed ships emerged from the coastal fog of Norway and landed at Lindisfarne Monastery off the coast of England. The screams of monks echoed across the beach. Never before had they encountered an enemy so utterly ruthless. The Norsemen did not just plunder gold and valuables. They burned, slaughtered, and dragged captives into slavery. An age of terror had arrived. The Viking Age had officially begun. Why did these people become such ferocious warriors? The answer lay deep within their belief, the clashing of iron axes against wooden shields. This was a land forged from ice and blood, a realm that birthed the demons of the ocean and transformed a living hell. But if they fell in battle with an axe in hand and blood on their chest, the Valkyries would swoop down from the heavens to carry their souls to Valhalla, Odin's warrior paradise, where they would feast, drink, and fight until the end of the world. This belief transformed Viking warriors into fearless demons. Death on the battlefield was not a tragedy. It was the ultimate victory. Viking fleets from the Norwegian fjords began fanning out in every direction. Some sailed west, seizing the Shetland and Orkney Islands, Iceland, and pushing as far as Greenland. Some were bold enough to brave the open Atlantic all the way to North America, led by Leif Erikson, 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Yet, while Norwegian Vikings were raiding and striking fear across the globe, their homeland remained plunged in conflict. Chieftains waged relentless wars for dominance, staining the fjords dark with blood. Until one man stepped forward with an extraordinary oath. The Iron Ages arrived. A slightly warmer climate gave rise to small farming communities scattered along the fjords. Yet legend has it that Harald sent suitors to propose marriage to Gyda, a princess of Hordaland. But his proposal was met with cold rejection and fierce insult. Gyda declared she would never marry a king who ruled over mere petty territories. She would only become his queen if Harald could unite all of Norway under his sole rule, just as the kings of Denmark and Sweden had done. That rejection did not break Harald's heart. Instead, it ignited an unquenchable fire of ambition. Harald swore a sacred oath before the gods that he would neither cut, comb, nor wash his hair until he succeeded in unifying all of Norway. People mocked him, calling him Harald Tanglehair or Harald Shockhead. But it was no laughing matter, because Harald launched a ruthless campaign, invading territory after territory. Those who submitted were allowed to rule their lands under Harald's shadow. But for those who resisted, their homes were burned to the ground and their heads impaled on stakes along the shore. And the next, there was no Norway back then, only isolated valleys ruled by hundreds of petty chieftains. Finally, the remaining opposition joined forces in a grand alliance to stop this unstoppable force. Around 872 AD, in a narrow waterway called Hafrsfjord near present-day Stavanger, the final act of the unification war commenced. Hundreds of longships collided in utter chaos. The deafening clash of shields echoed through the skies, turning the ocean waves crimson. Harald's berserkers, wild warriors clad in animal pelts, fighting like savage beasts, charged forward, crushing the enemy alliance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, almost all of Harald's enemies were slain. The survivors fled desperately by ship, sailing toward Ireland and Iceland. Harald emerged victorious. The Battle of Hafrsfjord became the greatest turning point in Norwegian history. Norway was no longer a collection of divided tribes, but a single kingdom under its first monarch, King Harald I, known as Harald Fairhair, after he finally trimmed his decade-long tangled locks. Met with cold rejection and fierce insult. Gyda declared she would never marry a king. Following Harald Fairhair's death, Norway plunged into chaos once more, as his many sons fought violently for the throne. Among them was Eric Bloodaxe, who slaughtered his own brothers to seize power. Yet far more dangerous than dynastic civil war was a new wave surging from continental Europe: Christianity. For the Norse, the old beliefs in Odin, Thor, and Freya were the very roots of their way of life. To European powers, however, the Norse were mere pagans who needed to be converted and brought to heel. Subsequent Norwegian kings, like Olaf Tryggvason, came to realize that Christianity was not just a faith, it was a formidable political tool. A single faith, a single god, and a single king ordained by divine right would make centralizing power over Norway vastly easier. Olaf launched a brutal conversion campaign. Anyone who refused Christ was tortured, exiled, or beheaded. Ancient pagan temples and altars were burned to ashes. This conflict reached its absolute climax under King Olaf Haraldsson, a ruthless and unyielding ruler. From his queen, if Harald could unite all of Norway under his sole rule, just as the kings of Denmark held on stakes along the shore. The war dragged on for decades as Harald gathered his forces, marching down from the north and crushing chieftains. A fierce battle erupted as war cries of Christ's warriors clashed against the thunderous roars of Thor, being cast into the cold, dreary realm of hell. But if they fell in battle, with an axe in hand and blood on their chest, the king collapsed and died on the field, his blood soaking deep into the green grass, into fearless demons. Death on the battlefield was not a tragedy. It was the ultimate victory. Just months after his death, miraculous stories regarding King Olaf's corpse began to spread. Claims emerged that his body remained uncorrupted and his wounds cured diseases. In the open fields of Stiklestad, King Olaf. Olaf's death did not destroy Christianity. Instead, it solidified it as the dominant faith of Norway. The old Viking way of life and faith in Odin and Valhalla gradually faded into the shadows of history. In 1066, Harald Hardrada, the formidable king of Norway, led hundreds of longships to invade England at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Struck in the throat by an arrow, he fell on the battlefield, an event marked in history as the official end of the Viking Age. Life in that era was a constant battle against the freezing cold, ready to claim lives the moment the fire went out. Archaeological evidence, such as the rock art in Alta in the far north. Yet Norway's trials were far from over, for a calamity far greater than any war was making its way along European trade routes. A dark reaper that would devour over half the nation's population and plunge Norway into 4 centuries of dark stillness. The collapse of the Viking Age in 1066 did not bring peace to Norway. Instead, it was only the beginning of a new chaos. The land of fjords soon faced a new storm, a brutal civil war that would tear the nation apart for over a century. A ruthless struggle for the throne erupted between the Birkebeiners, the impoverished Birchlegs, and the Baglers, backed by the church. Norway plunged into utter turmoil, stained by the blood of its own people. Valleys that once knew peace echoed with the clash of steel, and the dream of a unified kingdom slipped further out of reach. Until the rise of King Sverre, and later King Hakon IV in the 13th century, they silenced internal conflicts and finally brought stability back to the realm, ushering in what would become known as Norway's medieval Golden Age. During this golden era, Norway's power expanded far beyond the Scandinavian coast. Iceland, Greenland, Shetland, and Orkney all submitted to the sovereign rule of the Norwegian king. The western port of Bergen became one of the most prosperous trading hubs in northern Europe. Merchant vessels from across the known world filled the fjords with life, and the Hanseatic League established its presence, bringing unprecedented wealth. What was once a land of wild Vikings had transformed into a formidable northern maritime empire. In the summer of 1349, an unexpected herald of death sailed toward their shores. A lone English merchant ship drifted quietly into Bergen Harbor. Its cargo was unloaded onto the docks by unsuspecting workers. Little did they know, the ship brought neither fine fabrics nor precious spices, but a deadly parasite hidden within fleas and rats. Seized the opportunity presented by a weakened Scandinavia. She united Norway Within weeks, the plague raced along trade routes and over steep mountains, striking every fjord and village with terrifying speed. High fevers, black buboes, and coughing blood became everyday horrors across the land. Prayers in churches were swallowed by cries of despair. Thousands of bodies lay abandoned in the streets, left untouched and without last rites. Hundreds of communities vanished, leaving behind ghost towns, haunted only by the winter wind. In less than 2 years, more than half of Norway's population perished. The plague did not just claim lives. It shattered Norway's social, economic, and political backbone. The nobility, scholars, and clergy were decimated. Taxation collapsed, and governance ground to a complete halt. A once great kingdom was left crippled, fragile, and defenseless. With no strong heirs to claim the throne, Norway faced the slow loss of its independence. In 1397, Queen Margrethe I of Denmark seized the opportunity presented by a weakened Scandinavia. She united Norway, Sweden, and Denmark under a single political alliance, the Kalmar Union. In theory, it was an equal alliance among 3 sovereign nations. In reality, power shifted entirely to Copenhagen. Eventually, Sweden fought back and broke away from the Union. But Norway, too broken to fight, was reduced from a kingdom to a mere Danish province. The Norwegian Council was dissolved, and Denmark ruled the land through foreign officials. Norway's rich resources, timber, minerals, and fish were stripped away to enrich Denmark, while the Norwegian people suffered under crushing taxes and neglect. The rise of King Sverre and the Old Norse language was replaced by Danish in all official and religious texts. Norway's history was silenced, as if its glorious past had never existed. This era became known as the 400-year Night, a long age where Norway remained in the shadows, voiceless and subjugated. Yet, beneath centuries of ice and darkness, the spirit of the fjords never truly died. Tales of ancient warriors and the longing for freedom were quietly passed down by the hearth, waiting for the day the spark of liberation would ignite once more. As the 19th century dawned, the furious winds of the Napoleonic Wars swept violently across Europe, relentlessly dragging the realm of Denmark-Norway into an unavoidable political tempest. The British Royal Navy established a suffocating blockade over crucial North Sea shipping lanes and the strategic waters of the Skagerrak Strait. As a result, vital supply lines, the essential lifeline delivering flour and wheat to sustain the people of Norway, were completely severed. Already fragile, the land of Norway was plunged into one of the most devastating famines in its history. To make matters worse, the brutal climate of the Little Ice Age brought endless winters. Crops failed entirely as the soil froze harder than solid stone. In remote fjords, desperate villagers stripped bark from tree trunks, grinding it fine to mix with tiny scraps of flour, creating bark bread just to survive. Countless children and elders perished from sheer starvation and biting cold, their lifeless bodies laid to rest beneath the freezing snow. Yet, amidst this overwhelming darkness and despair, a quiet spark began to ignite in the hearts of the fjord people, an awakening of their true identity and human dignity. The people began to question their fate. They wondered why the lives, survival, and destiny of Norwegians were constantly dictated by a Danish king far away in Copenhagen, a monarch who had never once walked upon Norwegian snow, nor felt an ounce of the fjord people's suffering. In 1814, following Denmark's defeat in the Napoleonic Wars, the Danish king was forced to sign the Treaty of Kiel, ceding Norway to Sweden as a war prize for Prince Karl Johan in the strategic waters of the Skagerrak Strait. As a result, vital supply lines, the essential lifeline delivering flour and wheat to sustain the people. But this time, the Norwegians refused to comply. 4 centuries of oppression and neglect transformed into raw courage and defiance. 112 delegates, nobles, thinkers, merchants, commanders, and ordinary citizens gathered at Eidsvoll Manor in the spring of 1814 to declare to the world that Norway was no one's property, but a free, sovereign nation. The fate of Norway was traded like mere property from one hand to another, without a single thought for the will, feelings, or dignity of its people. But this time, it was deeply inspired by the ideals of liberty from the American and French Revolution. Though Sweden subsequently invaded to enforce its claim, leading to a brief war that ended in a personal union under the Swedish king, Norway miraculously safeguarded its ultimate treasures, its own constitution, its parliament, the Storting, and complete internal self-governance. The dawn of liberation had broken. May 17th became Norway's cherished national day, celebrated to this day with pride and traditional bunad attire. Throughout the 19th century, the era of romantic nationalism fully awakened Norway's spirit, as iconic poets, musicians, and artists forged a distinct national identity. Edvard Grieg, whose timeless melodies echoed the majesty of Norway's mountains and fjords across the globe, Henrik Ibsen, the playwright who revolutionized world theater by boldly challenging societal norms, and ordinary citizens gathered at Eidsvoll Manor in the spring of 1814 to declare to the world. Meanwhile, Ivar Aasen trekked thousands of kilometers across mountains and fjords to collect uncorrupted local dialects, creating Nynorsk, a written language uniquely their own. By 1905, political disputes over trade and foreign representation reached a boiling point when Sweden denied Norway the right to establish its own foreign consulates. The Norwegian parliament unilaterally dissolved the union. In a historic referendum, 368,000 citizens voted for independence, with only 184 opposed. The dissolution was peaceful, dignified, and bloodless. A revolution waged with ink and ballots made Norway fully independent at last. As the 19th century dawned, the furious winds of the Napoleonic Wars swept violently across Europe, relentlessly dragging the realm of Denmark-Norway. After centuries in the shadows, Norway emerged once more as a fully sovereign nation with a king of its own. Yet this newfound peace would face its ultimate ordeal just decades later, as World War II broke out across Europe. Despite Norway's strict neutrality, its strategic North Atlantic coastline and vital iron ore routes made it a prime target for Hitler's Nazi regime. On the dark, foggy morning of April 9, 1940, Operation Weserübung was launched, as Nazi forces unleashed a surprise invasion on Norwegian ports. At Oscarsborg Fortress in the Oslo Fjord, Colonel Birger Eriksen faced the crucial decision of his life as the massive German cruiser Blücher approached. Without orders from above, he gave the command to fire coastal cannons and torpedoes, sinking the German flagship into the depths. This heroic act bought precious time, allowing King Haakon VII, the royal family, and the government to escape Oslo. Amidst the chaos, traitorous politician Vidkun Quisling proclaimed himself leader of a puppet government, sparking national outrage. The Nazis issued an ultimatum, demanding King Haakon recognize Quisling's government. The king stood resolutely firm. Declaring he would rather abdicate than serve a puppet state, the king's no became the rallying cry of Norwegian resistance. Relentlessly hunted by Nazi bombers, the king and government escaped into the northern wilderness before establishing a government in exile in London. Throughout 5 years of occupation, the Milorg resistance waged a silent, fierce underground war of sabotage and covert intelligence. Their most legendary operation took place at the Vemork plant in Ryukin, the sole source of heavy water vital for Nazi atomic bomb research. Led by Joachim Roneberg, Norwegian commandos parachuted onto the frozen Hardangervidda Plateau, braving sub-zero blizzards on skis. Infiltrating Vemork, they successfully destroyed the heavy water facility without losing a single life, thwarting Hitler's nuclear ambitions and altering world history. When the war ended in May 1945, Nazi forces surrendered, and King Haakon VII returned to Oslo to the ecstatic cheers of hundreds of thousands. Yet war left tragic scars. Northern Finnmark was utterly devastated by the retreating German army's scorched earth policy. The economy was broken, leaving an impoverished nation surviving on fishing, merchant shipping, and forestry at Europe's outer edge. Little did anyone know, beneath the violent, icy depths of the North Sea, an unimaginable treasure was lying silently, waiting to transform Norway forever. In the 1950s, post-World War II Norway remained a land deeply scarred, lingering in darkness and uncertainty. The northern territories were left in ashes, devastated by the Nazi scorched earth policy. Hundreds of thousands struggled to rebuild their lives from the rubble. The nation's economy relied heavily on cod fishing, cargo shipping, and timber production. Per capita income was among the lowest in Western Europe. The freezing cold and unforgiving rocky soil posed a perpetual test of endurance for those living along the fjords. To the rest of the world, Norway was merely a quiet, peripheral nation, devoid of political influence and lacking any valuable resources to attract global attention. Furthermore, in 1958, when the Norwegian Federation of Industries formally asked the Geological Survey of Norway about the possibility of finding oil or natural gas under the North Sea, the response from top geologists at the time was a firm, definitive, and hopeless verdict. The chances of finding petroleum off the Norwegian coast were absolute zero. The seabed was composed of ancient, impenetrable granite bedrock, incapable of trapping oil. Searching for fortune beneath those violent waves was dismissed as a desperate pipe dream. Then came the 1960s. The world was changing. The booming modern era and growing industries demanded immense amounts of energy. American energy giant Phillips Petroleum took note of natural gas discoveries in the Netherlands. They decided to gamble, requesting exclusive rights to explore beneath Norway's North Sea seabed. The proposal sparked intense debates in Parliament. However, guided by visionary legal mind Jens Evensen, Norway acted swiftly to declare sovereignty over its continental shelf, securing rights to whatever lay beneath before foreign powers could lay claim. Exploratory drilling began in one of the most hostile marine environments on Earth. The North Sea proved to be anything but welcoming. Waves as tall as 10-story buildings, blinding blizzards, and sub-zero temperatures turned life on the drilling platforms into a living hell on water. Year after year, oil companies burned through billions of dollars. The first 15 exploratory wells yielded nothing but empty rock. Confronted with relentless failures, Phillips Petroleum was ready to cancel its contracts and pull out entirely. But the contract obligated them to drill one final well. In late autumn 1969, close to Christmas, the drilling rig Ocean Viking was operating in a fierce North Sea storm. Fatigue and despair hung heavy over the crew, expecting another empty hole. The heavy steel drill bit ground thousands of meters into the ocean floor. And then, on December 23, 1969, a historic moment occurred that altered the nation's destiny forever. Immense pressure forced a dark, viscous fluid surging up through the bedrock. It was high-grade crude oil in quantities beyond imagination. They had struck Ekofisk, one of the largest offshore oil fields ever discovered. An incredible reality emerged. Beneath the freezing, dark waters of the North Sea, Norway was sitting on a $1 trillion petroleum treasure. News of the Ekofisk discovery spread worldwide like wildfire. Overnight, this quiet Scandinavian nation became the prime target for multinational conglomerates seeking a share of the wealth. Throughout history, resource-rich nations often fell victim to the resource curse or Dutch disease, leading to widespread corruption, extreme inequality, economic collapse, and wealth extracted by foreign powers. But Norway was determined not to follow in those footsteps. Enter Farouk al-Qasim, an Iraqi petroleum geologist married to a Norwegian woman who had recently settled in Oslo. Drawing on his deep expertise in Middle Eastern oil, al-Qasim advised the Norwegian government, if left to foreign private corporations, the resource would be rapidly depleted without benefiting the people. Norway, he insisted, had to take state control of its oil industry. In 1971, the Norwegian parliament enacted the 10 Oil Commandments, a masterclass in governance, decreeing that petroleum resources belonged entirely to the Norwegian people, not to monarchs, politicians, or private entities. The government established the state oil company Statoil, now Equinor, alongside a petroleum directorate. Crucially, all knowledge, technology, and jobs were to be transferred to the local workforce. Massive taxes and dividends from oil production flowed into the state budget, systematically building the modern nation. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, oil revenues poured in. The quiet coastal town of Stavanger, once reliant on sardine canning, transformed into the energy capital of Europe. World-class infrastructure, bridges, and subsea tunnels connected isolated fjord communities. Healthcare, higher education, and social welfare systems were elevated to among the best on Earth. Yet the true challenge was not generating wealth, it was preventing this tide of capital from destroying the domestic economy. In the 1990s, amid volatile global oil prices, Norwegian leaders recognized a fundamental truth. Oil reserves would one day run dry, and overspending domestically would trigger severe inflation. In 1990, Parliament took an unprecedented step, founding the State Petroleum Fund, known today as the Government Pension Fund Global, or Oljefondet. Oil revenues were placed into this fund and invested globally in real estate, equities, and bonds, spanning over 9,000 companies across more than 70 nations. A strict fiscal rule was introduced. The government could withdraw no more than 3 to 4% of the fund's returns annually. The principal capital was preserved strictly for future generations. From its first deposit in 1996, Norway's sovereign wealth fund grew exponentially, becoming the largest in the world, surpassing $1.5 trillion in assets. The fund holds nearly 1.5% of all publicly traded global equities. Effectively, every Norwegian citizen, from newborns to retirees, holds a fortune worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. From a barren, impoverished landscape, modern Norway has risen to rank consistently highest in human development, quality of life, and global happiness. Families in remote fjords no longer fear harsh winters or poverty. Universal healthcare, tuition-free education, and robust social safety nets protect every citizen from cradle to grave. Yet immense wealth hasn't altered the national ethos. Norwegians remain grounded, guided by modesty, a deep reverence for nature, and the ethos of law of Jante, the belief that no individual is superior to another. Look back across the millennia of this rock-bound land. Thousands of years ago, Stone Age humans carved small boats into the cave walls at Alta, hoping simply to survive the winter. Viking warriors raised iron axes and braved stormy seas to raid foreign lands because their homeland could not feed them. King Harald Fairhair swore an oath to unite the nation through fire, blood, and iron. Countless fjord dwellers perished from starvation, reduced to grinding tree bark for bread during centuries of hardship. And resistance fighters skied through -30-degree blizzards to defend their land against Nazi tyranny. The hardship and pain of the past forged a spirit as unyielding as the granite beneath the fjords. The prosperity enjoyed today was not mere luck. It was forged through wisdom, sacrifice, and the belief that the future of coming generations is priceless. Today, looking out across the tranquil fjords, the northern lights still dance across icy skies, just as they have for 10,000 years. The ocean roar that once signaled peril for Viking seafarers now sings an anthem of peace and pride for a nation that conquered hardship to build one of humanity's finest civilizations. Norway's story is more than the tale of a small northern nation. It is proof that no matter how harsh the land or dark the past, a united people can forge an enduring light upon the earth.